Hey, this is David, and I recorded this episode of Ola at Large a few weeks ago before all the missiles started flying with Iran. So while this episode is particularly pertinent, it's also slightly out of date in terms of the emergency messaging procedures, and in fact, those just changed up today. We're all good here in Israel. The family is all in one place, basically, between Hashmonaim and Modiin, and we are all in safety shelters when we need to be. And thank you for all the messages. And here is the podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Ola at Large, Aliyah Stories. Welcome back. This is David Levine. This is my podcast about my journey of immigrating to Israel as an Oleh Chadash, which means new immigrant, and the journey of making Aliyah, which means to go up. In this episode, I have a very special guest. I had the idea to have this episode because often on my social media, I post pictures of the map of Israel with little red dots and talk about missiles coming and having to go into bomb shelters. And I wanted to unpack it a little bit and explain it a little bit. And I thought, who better than my niece, Ruthie Abitbol. Ruthie volunteers for the home security organization in several different ways. And I wanted her to share with us a little bit about that, understand what those notifications are all about, and also share what her experience was like as an Oleh Chadash. She herself made Aliyah when she was a kid. So we're going to welcome onto the podcast, Ruthie Abitbol. So in this episode, I have a very special guest. I had the idea to have this episode because often on my social media, I post pictures of the map of Israel with all these little red dots and talk about missiles coming and having to go into bomb shelters. And I wanted to unpack it a little bit and explain it a little bit. And I thought, who better than my niece, Ruthie Abitbol, who volunteers for the Home Front organization. And she does this in several different ways. And I wanted her to share with us a little bit about that, but also share with us her experience of being an Oleh because she moved here when she was a kid. So with no further ado, please welcome Ruthie Abitbol to the podcast. Ruthie, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. I know you are very busy with work and volunteering and your children and your family. So let's jump in. Tell me, how old were you when you made Aliyah, and what was it like when you had that experience, when you had to make a move?
So I was 10 years old when my family made Aliyah, my mom, myself, and my younger sisters. And it was the summer in between 4th and 5th grade. So I was just getting started to start 5th grade. I think that way back then, the biggest ordeal of making Aliyah was that there was no nefesh b'nefesh. So it was kind of like a sink or swim situation. And it was kind of everyone had to figure themselves out, whether it was ulpan or finding a job. There wasn't that support system that Olim have today.
And did you have to learn Hebrew from scratch? Were you already learning some Hebrew? Did you have to go to a special ulpan for children, or did you just start in regular Israeli school?
So it was a little bit more complicated than that because in the States, I was educated in an ultra-religious school. So when I got here, I didn't speak any conversational Hebrew or even know the words of the Hatikva. There was no ulpan where we made Aliyah to. So I was sent to a Hebrew-speaking school with zero knowledge of Hebrew, written, reading, speaking, anything. And I just kind of had to figure myself out.
All right, so I'm going to just do some definitions. We were saying you didn't know the words Hatikva. Hatikva is the national anthem, and Ohan is the course that one takes to learn Hebrew when you move to Israel. So how long did it take for you once you got to school and you began learning? How long did it take you to feel like you had acclimated?
I think probably by the end of my first year in school, I would say. So probably about 10 months in.
And how did it feel in terms of making friends and figuring out the different way that kids grow up here or were growing up here when you were a young kid versus America?
So I think in general, Aliyah is easier for children as far as learning the language and acclimating. And our family in particular, we moved to a place with a lot of English-speaking families. So socially, it was much easier for us.
Where did you guys move to?
We moved to Modiin.
And what is Chashmonaim? What kind of a town or what is it?
Modiin is a yishuv, which is a settlement in the center of Israel, actually not far from where I live today in Modiin. And that is where I grew up until I got married and moved to Modiin.
Great. And so now that you're married with children, you have 3 beautiful boys who I adore and a wonderful husband who I also adore. How do you feel your American origin and being an Oleh, all the years that you spent as an Oleh, how has that influenced the way that you raise your family?
I think it changed everything about who I am and how I live my life, how I raise my kids. I think that my kids are being raised in a different environment with different priorities. And I think that my husband and I both believe in showing them the way and leading by example. So they see firsthand how we believe in living life. And then hopefully they make those same choices as they get older as well.
And what are those priorities for you?
So it's actually interesting. I was interviewed last year before Independence Day here, through the city of Modiin, and they asked me that same question. And I said to them that living in Israel is about priorities. It's not the easiest place to live. It's not the cheapest place to live, but the priorities here are very clear. It's family, country, and community. And I think that if you ask anyone who's raising children in this country, in a Zionistic home, they will probably have very similar answer to what I just said.
Amazing. And are there any American traditions or values specifically that you continue to pass down to the kids?
Not really. They ask me questions sometimes about U.S. related holidays from what they see on television. So they'll ask me, why don't we celebrate Thanksgiving? Things like that, which we don't. But we have actually in the past couple of years, only because my mom ended up marrying an Oleh, and he's very interested and loves Thanksgiving. So, they've had the turkey and the stuffing the last which I guess for them really is all about the food. Thanksgiving, like they don't have historical value behind it. So yeah, but we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Independence Day. We don't celebrate July 4th.
Right.
That kind of thing.
And in terms of English, less particular to being American, but more in terms of English speaking in general, how do you deal with that?
So that is one of the things that is very important to me in my day-to-day parenting life, is that both my husband and I really make an effort to only speak in English at home, to have the boys answer us in English, to have them reading for fun in English. They're very much exposed to English. We have a great English program in our school here as well that we have enrolled them in the past few years. And I think that just making sure they maintain it, because it's really, in my opinion, a tool for life.
Great. And it's also a tool for them to be able to speak to me and Bubby, my mom.
That is correct. Yes.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
anyone in the family who comes from the States or, as a visit, or who has made Aliyah, they're able to freely have, relationships that they can converse.
And one of the beautiful things that I saw in your house actually was that there was a kid that had also just come to make Aliyah, and I saw Adir really just embrace him and was so friendly to him and helping him out. And being able to speak English really facilitated that. Do you have advice for anyone who is married with children and is considering Aliyah?
So I think that the kids who are being raised here by English-speaking parents can potentially play a really big role in other children's Aliyah transitions. As I said, I had friends who, when I made Aliyah and I was struggling in the classroom, that were explaining things to me and translating and just kind of being a buffer. And my boys, hear from my stories about how that was, part of my experience that really helped me. So they kind of have facilitated themselves into those roles in their own classrooms. And throughout the years, they've had new kids coming from different countries, different states that, they see are struggling. And they will go to the teacher and say, sit me next to this Ola or Ole so that I can be that buffer and I can be that translator. So I think that plays a very big role. And I think that anyone who's looking to make Aliyah with children really needs to do their homework. I think really it's to manage expectations. As I said, life here is different for the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's more expensive, but I truly believe that at the end of the day, when there's a successful Aliyah story, your kids will thank you for it for the rest of their lives.
I hear you. So now you live in Modiin, and tell me about Modiin. Are there other young Olim type families there? Would that be a good city for someone who is considering Aliyah?
I think that Modiin would probably be one of the top cities for Aliyah. There's lots of support for Olim here, all the facilities and amenities. They have Ulpan and they have all kinds of courses and things for Olim to choose from. And there's English speakers from all religious backgrounds. You have, people who are single, people who are newlyweds, people with kids, people with older kids. I would definitely say that it's one of the top places for anyone who's looking to make Aliyah, especially with kids, to come here. Because if it's not, an Ole family, then it's someone from an English-speaking family. And there's just a lot of support and community, especially around families who are making Aliyah, to kind of support that transition for them.
Amazing. Well, I can say as an Ole Chadash, Modiin was my first landing spot, and it was very, very easy to acclimate because of all the English speakers. So now you volunteer with Modiin. Tell me what you do as a volunteer.
So I volunteer and I'm trained with the Homefront Command. I originally started off volunteering on a municipality level. I did my basic training here through the city of Modiin, which they offer, anyone who's looking for a more active volunteer opportunity, which I had been at the time. And then they offered me advanced training with the Homefront Command, which I did as well.
So what does that mean? What does that entail? Like, what do you have to do?
So my specific training is when a building collapses, and that could be either from a natural disaster like an earthquake, or it could be something that is terror related. So it could be a suicide bomber, or it could be, a missile being shot at a building. And then my training comes into play once that building has been hit or has collapsed to some extent, and then how we do the search and rescue to kind of try and make sure that anyone who was in the building at the time of the collapse is found and brought out to safety.
Wow. Amazing. Let's take a step back, though. So one of the apps that you download when you move here is the Sohar app. And it is the app and the system that gives you alarms of what's going on in the country, if there's any kind of reason to go into a bomb shelter. Can you discuss exactly what that is and why you would get a notification? And even, there's been new kinds of notifications that I just got one of them for the first time over the weekend. Can you explain what that is exactly?
Yes. So that is one of the apps that people can download to be made aware of any kind of security breaches in their area. So the most important thing is to download an app that you can rely on and depend on, which is why I always recommend actually downloading the Homefront Commands app. Zohar is a great app, but I like to stick to the Homefront Command app, and I'll explain why in a second. But
what's the name of the Homefront Command app?
I'm actually going to look on my phone to see if it's called Homefront Command.
Okay.
And the second thing that's really important is to make sure that the app knows what your designated area is, to make sure that it knows where you're located so that in real time it can tell you what's going on in your surroundings. And now I'm just going to explain why I prefer the Homefront Command app. And that is because the first reason is because it also will tell you about natural disasters. It will tell you if there's an earthquake alert. It will tell you if there is, a terrorist infiltration. It will tell you all of the things that you need to know, not just about sirens in your area of incoming missiles. And you had mentioned over the weekend that we got a new kind of notification, which is now the Homefront Command trying to give people opportunities to get to safety before the siren sounds, meaning the Homefront Command app potentially now is going to say, which a lot of us got over the weekend, is going to say there is a potential siren that is going to sound in your area, and this is what is expected. Now you have even more time to kind of get yourself to safety and make sure that you take cover in an appropriate space.
And the Homefront Command app is also in English, right?
Yes.
Amazing. And so the Homefront app actually is the one that gives you a broader range of protection than the SOFAR app. Actually, that's what it's called, SOFAR.
Right. And also the Homefront Command also has just general guidelines in like safety guidelines. If there's an earthquake, if there's a terrorist infiltration, if there's an incoming missile, which is generally information that's very basic information that people just don't know.
Right.
As far as what to do if there's an earthquake, what to do if there is an incoming missile.
Interesting. Great. Okay. Yeah. So over this past weekend, we got one of those little preview alerts. I got that over regular text, I think, or I have to double check. We got one of those preview alerts, but then at least for my area, nothing else happened. So I basically rolled back over and went to sleep. I think you didn't have a full alert this weekend, right?
No, we didn't. We got there could be a potential expected siren. I wasn't as lucky to be able to roll back over and go back to sleep though.
Did you get everyone all ready in the house to get moving?
I didn't, but like I ran out into the hallway, and then I was kind of just standing there looking at Ophir, my husband, and saying like, so do we get the boys? Do we not get the boys? And then he was like, let's go back to bed and let's just see what happens. If there's a siren, then we're awake anyways.
Right.
And there wasn't a siren. There was no follow-up siren. So I guess always better to be prepared and on your toes and just expect that sometimes it will happen and sometimes it won't.
Right. I was only responsible for me and the dog, so I figured if there was gonna be another alarm, we would get ourselves up and out. But we just rolled back over.
Right. And we have a safe room in our house that's like fully prepared and stocked. So if it comes to that, we're very close by, and we have 90 seconds in our area.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I just downloaded the Homefront Command, and I'm thinking I'm going to use this one from now on. Yeah. This one says I have 1.5 minutes too. So 90 seconds.
Right. Always know wherever you're located, what your time frame is to get to safety, I think is another very important thing. 90 seconds, to someone maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but some places have way less than 90 seconds. Some places have more. So just to know how long you have to get to safety, I think is another one.
Okay. So what motivated you to get involved in doing more volunteer work?
I think probably also the way I was raised. Our family is very much focused on, who's around you and your community and your fellow Jew. And I think I was brought up in a house where volunteering and doing things for others was very much a part of our lives. And when I saw that I had, some time on my hands to do some sort of training or volunteer work, I didn't want to be sitting at a desk. I didn't want to be, committing to anything that was a day-to-day thing or a weekly thing because my schedule changes and, life gets crazy. But something where I could be active when needed.
Right.
And this really just checked all my boxes.
Amazing. Super proud of you. I love it. It makes us all very proud. So now looking back, how do you feel about your family's decision to move to Israel?
So I always say this to my friends who made Aliyah as adults. They're so brave and they're so much braver than I was. Like as a child, no one asked me, how do you feel about making Aliyah? What are your priorities in life? What's important to you as a person? It was kind of like at the end of the summer, we're moving to Israel where you have no language skills, no friends, no anything. So it was kind of like as a child,
You roll with it.
Yeah, you got to roll with it. No one's asking your opinion. You get on the plane. So I think for me, Aliyah was kind of just placed in front of me as a fact of life. And I think that people who are making Aliyah as an adult, when it's their active decision, they are the ones that I really, take my hat off to.
That's cool. So now, what do you hope your children learn from your experience as an Aliyah?
I think not to take the fact that they were born and raised here for granted. I tell my boys all the time, you're so lucky you were born here. I wish I could have been born here. I wish I could have been raised here from day one. And I don't think that they understand it fully, but I hope that one day they will.
I think, I can see just seeing how the kids live their lives, both how you guys grew up in Hashmonaim and also how the boys are growing up in Modiin, that the experience of childhood is so much richer and freer. The idea of kids, Adir went out on Friday night by himself to hang out with his friends and had to be home at 10:30, and he's 11 years old. That is totally fine.
Or that my 9-year-old can walk himself to school or to judo by himself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I try and tell them stories about when I was a kid growing up in the States. And I'll say to them, there was, a point in my childhood where kids were not allowed to play alone in their own yard because people were grabbing kids off the street. And they're like, what do you mean? So how did you go to school? Like they don't understand the difference. And they obviously, kids growing up here, especially in today's world, they have, different concerns and different fears living here as opposed to the States. But I think at the end of the day, they are just so independent. They're so down to earth. And I think that every time they meet a new Oleh child and they can tell the differences, they kind of get a taste of what it could have been like for them had I not made Aliyah as a child and moved here and had I been raising them there.
Great. Okay. Well, Ruthie, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. I really appreciate it. And let's see if we can come up with a word of the podcast. Every episode, we try to come up with a new word that is either Hebrew or Israeli or a slang. And I don't know if you have one ready for me to tell me.
I do, actually. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I was waiting for this part of the podcast because I actually did think about this. My phrase is going to be chaval al azman.
Chaval al azman.
Which, if you want to make it shorter, is havlatz.
Havlatz. Okay, what does that mean?
So Chaval al-Azman is either saying it's a waste of time, don't bother, or it can be it was worth every minute. And everything in Hebrew has, a lot of passion when you're speaking and a lot of emotion as and spoken to an Israeli can testify. So that's why when you send it as a text message, if you ask someone a question and their answer is Chaval al-Azman and you don't have, the feeling or the context, you can say, well, are they saying it was the best time I ever had, or are they saying, oh, it was such a waste of my time?
So basically, it's used in response to, because Azman is time. So it's basically like, oh, did you have a good time at the museum? And you could be like, Chaval Azman, and if it's either got a smiley emoji or a frown emoji, and then that's in text how you would know, and then the way you deliver it. Got it. Okay, I love it. That's a good one.
Also, if there's no emoji, then the follow-up question would be good or bad.
Right. And what's the contraction of it again?
Havlatz.
Havlatz. And you can just say it back. Havlatz.
Yeah.
All right.
You can say it back, but you have to really put what you mean into what you're saying.
So did you have a good time on this podcast?
Chaval al-Azman.
Amazing. All right. Yofi. Thank you so much, Ruthie. You're the best. I love you. And thank you for being part of the podcast. That's it for this episode of Ola at Large, Aliyah Stories. I want to thank my guests and I want to thank you. Thanks for listening. Please give a like, give a follow, and catch you next time.